Welcome to the Future of Supply Chain, presented by Dynamo. Each episode, we sit down with leaders in the industry as we build the future of supply chain together. Let's get into the show. Here's our host, Santosh Sankar.
Hey, ladies and gents, welcome back to the Future of Supply Chain podcast. I'm your host, Santosh Sankar, and joining me today is Wayne Usie, EVP of Market Development at Blue Yonder. Welcome, Wayne.
Thank you, Santosh. Appreciate you having me today.
So I'm going to jump right into it, right? Blue Yonder is a household name amongst our listeners. So I'm going to maybe kind of take this another direction, but what's the Wayne Usie story? How did you get into the world of supply chain software?
Well, that's a great question. You know how it is. You never really predict where you're going to actually land in your career. It just happens by circumstance in some cases. But I started my career out actually in public accounting. And of course, like most servants in that sector, you end up going to work for one of your clients, which happened to be in retail, which got me down the path of retail. And I spent time with Family Dollar stores as well, overseeing their IT, getting into retail and supply chain. And JDA at the time, which is now rebranded to Blue Yonder, called me. And 25 years ago, I joined the company to run product development. And ever since then, we never looked back. We grew up through acquisition, got into manufacturing, 3PL, retail, and by default, I spent the better part of a quarter of a century in supply chain.
Amazing. Having done this since 2018, I feel like most people who end up in our industry never even thought of the industry kind of starting their career. So a bit of serendipity. So Blue Yonder, stalwart of the industry, been around since 1985. And I think one of the unique things, especially as we're trying to digest this new technology wave we're in the throes of related to AI, Blue Yonder has seen several technology waves. And so I shared that because I'd be curious, how are you and the team thinking about the role of AI and automation over the last few years? And how has that maybe changed during that period as you're learning more and kind of listening to customers? But kind of where might you be seeing acceleration? Is it around specific use cases and functions? Is it around certain industry end users of the product? How should we all kind of think about it through your lens?
Yeah, no, and listen, you're right. I mean, we've gone through a number of technology curves throughout the last, I would say 2 to 3 decades. And, the fortunate opportunity we have here at Blue Yonder is about 3 to 4 years ago, our ownership changed to Panasonic, and they think very, very long term. And as I shared earlier, we grew up through acquisition, assembling end-to-end capability across supply chain planning and execution. And again, it gives us an opportunity to serve 3 major verticals in manufacturing, both process industry and then 3PL and retail. And as we started embarking on reimagining how these things would come together, data is the number one opportunity in front of you, especially as AI technologies come around. And so we had a fortunate opportunity to partner with technology companies like Microsoft and Snowflake and actually create a single data cloud, a single semantic data model for the supply chain. And part of it was because we had planning capability in both disciplines of manufacturing and retail, warehouse management, transportation management, order management, now returns. And so that effort that we've gone through the last 4 years in replatforming the entire portfolio afforded us an opportunity when things like generative AI came into the picture, 24 months ago. And fortunately, we had done an acquisition back in 2018, which gave us predictive ML, and really started to apply it in the disciplines of retail and of manufacturing in supply chain, right? And so now that we have the data moat, if you will, we have a very fortunate opportunity to train these LLMs on very precise data. And that's the challenge in supply chain is it requires speed, but it also requires precision. And so we took a very approach in terms of how we applied it, where we have 20-year-old heuristic solvers that are patented that still give the precise answer on a multi-million line item bill of material in a manufacturer, right? And so those things get applied pragmatically today, but in the context of using AI to drive out the efficiency of the use of that. And so that's where we've had a lot of opportunity. We've obviously developed a number of agents, which we can get into, which are very specific in different layers of task aspects of it. And then obviously orchestration. So we have an orchestration, kind of overseeing of how all the agents and humans work together as we change the way we support supply chain.
And so I'd love to kind of push into that further, right? Where Blue Yonder has scale. Actually, when we think about moats in the world of AI, we break it down into domain, data, which you touched on, and distribution, which is really kind of partly related to scale. And that scale exists because you mentioned manufacturing. A lot of our audience might also know you for your WMS,
Right.
and equally kind of your TMS capability. But I'd be curious, kind of when you mentioned agents, kind of how are these agents being applied to kind of the life cycle? As at Dynamo, we talk about as making, moving, and monetizing goods.
Yeah.
And so as you kind of think of those categories, where have you seen agents kind of really shine? Because to your point, you have data, and that data is going to give you that advantage around training these models.
Yeah,
and how are they manifesting into results?
Yeah. So the first thing we were able to unlock when we actually finally came to fruition around a single data cloud for supply chain is we started having an opportunity to unlock what we call interoperability, right? So when you think of decisions that are made in a warehouse and optimized, sometimes those decisions are made at the expense of logistics and transportation, right? Because supply chain has been quite bespoke, right? And it's still somewhat, very independent and siloed in the way planning decisions are made and the way execution occurs. And so the opportunity we had was to unlock those workflows. And then when you talk specifically about agents, you start to look at it from a framework that we sort of looked at, and we call it the SATA loop. But it's really, does the agent have an ability to see data and understand what is it is assessing? Does it have an opportunity to analyze it, and then it can decide, and it can even act? And what's funny is, and this, is that technology actually is always further ahead than we humans are, right? And so in a lot of cases, the operators and the people working in supply chain want to have a say-so, right? They want to understand how the agent figured it out. So we took a level and an approach where we looked at discrete aspects of the way a warehouse management operation works, for example, where you have this concept around slotting inside the four walls of the warehouse, right? And it's basically your pick slots for where you have less than case full, and you have logic that flows in of how those slots get replenished, what items get put in. And so we built a slotting agent, which actually now is able to dynamically optimize based on the behavior of the items, the fast moving items, the picker productivity, and be able to, or you reduce inefficiency in that process, as an example. Right. And so that's very specific, what we call task level agents. And then you have a layer above that, which is like our warehouse ops agent, which literally is the assistant to the warehouse manager, where it can actually provide root cause analysis and help them understand what's really going on and give them predictive, obviously, measurements as well about decisions they have to make throughout the day, if you will, on moving forklifts, applying labor. It's a constant level of disruption they're faced with. So these things become, you get a daily brief when they walk in, and it gives them exactly what they have to consider. And then dynamically, as the day goes on, they're able to start getting, insight and become more optimized. Now, in some cases, as it gets smarter and smarter and smarter, you could have it become more autonomous, right? And say, for this section, I'll let the agent go and make all the decisions and actually integrate it. That was the power of what we did on our platform, is the agents are native on our platform around. So we not only can have observability, but we can actually have it execute the decisions that it comes up and says, here's what the best thing is to do. Go make this move. And it's fed directly into the warehouse solution.
And kind of embedded in some of the things you shared around, hey, a user wants to understand how an agent came up with a particular answer. As it gets smarter, it'll get more leeway to do things in an automated fashion. And implicit in that is trust.
Yes.
Right. And I'd be curious, how have you seen users, I guess, find their way towards trust? Because there's like trust embedded in the data quality, in the results, but we've oftentimes also seen in just kind of the way people are getting used to engaging with these technologies
Right.
and realizing, hey, like it's not necessarily going to put me in jeopardy. If anything, it might make me look like a rock star.
Right.
But
Exactly.
it's a
Yeah.
process.
It is. And it is all about trust. And the way that trust is usually achieved is they get a better outcome, right? It brings me back to the days of in retail around centralized replenishment. In the old days, the store manager made all the orders of inventory. And then as technology advanced, we started creating these centralized replenishment systems, which all retail runs today. But it was a transition for the store manager to have confidence that that order was actually better calculated than they could. And like anything else, it took time, and eventually no one questions it anymore, right? Because they know it's a better result. And it is, you mentioned scale, it's scale around volume. So like, for example, in Blue Yonder, we have about 25 billion predictions that are done every day in our data cloud. And so it's a scale issue as well, right? And the magnitude. So that's where we have seen the trust being built, is when the answer is better, it's more accurate and more consistent. It really helps build the confidence of letting the technology do its job, for the individual that's running the business. And it changes their bandwidth, right? Gives them time to be more strategic, start to understand. And then, of course, we're ridden with disruption every day. And so now it's more about the predictability of that and how you build resiliency. You hear about resiliency and you start to say, well, what does that really mean in supply chain? And it's really about, being able to respond to a disruption, right? As effectively and efficiently, as possible when you're in that space. So we are seeing, but it's funny, we actually had to build a lot of technology to explain what the actual AI engine did. It's not necessary for the outcome, as you know, right, Santosh? It's just we have to do it for human adoption, natural where we are.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the soft human side of a technology that can otherwise be viewed to be very complex. Is, hey, like there's real results being made, but none of that matters if the stakeholders around the table don't have a level of comfort. And the way you have comfort is transparency.
Exactly.
Like, I have nothing else.
Yeah. And you mentioned accuracy of data, by the way. That is one of the benefits, unlike, the public domain large language models, right, which can have, delusional responses. We are building it specifically on the supply chain domain, which, is the real accurate data for the customers. And we acquired a company called One Network about a year and a half ago, and that allowed us to expand the visibility of the actual movement of inventory and raw material, specifically across all constituents in the supply chain. And that was why we had to make that adjacency within our single data cloud, because everyone knows that the supply chain has multiple constituents that operate, from shippers to carriers to everyone else involved from the seller side and also from the buyer side. So it's giving us, that confidence to be able to build that data infrastructure, and it's reliable. That's the key.
So, one question that I've been fielding a lot from CIOs, CTOs in our network is they're kind of staring down do I buy horizontal? Do I buy vertical? If I need to do both, what are the heuristics and frameworks? And something we talk about is the fact that generalized models are great, but they're not as great when you're looking at a particular subject matter, breaking down subject matter into tasks and activities that require context. And so kind of what have you seen kind of is the push and pull? Because I think like most things in life, if we're to fast forward 7 to 10 years, it's kind of shades of gray and it's somewhere in the middle. It's probably not an either or. It's in these cases do this, in other cases do that.
Yeah, in supply chain for us, we're a little bit more definitive on that point of view. It is all about domain. You'll hear us talk about it, domain, right? So if I'm in the auto sector, I have to have a lot of specificity around exactly how that supply chain works, right? And exactly what's happening, very much similar to the pharmaceutical sector, right? Or CPG, or even high tech. They all have their nuances in the way their supply chains work. Some are heavy contract manufacturing oriented, some are not, right? And clearly when you understand it. So our point of view is that we actually have been executing on the promise to build at least an end-to-end platform for supply chain. We're not trying to compete in the ERP space or, HCM space or CRM. It's supply chain, and everything related to that is planning and execution, right? And how these things start to collapse on a time dimension still require a much, much granular level of specificity. And so customers, when you think about that horizontal view versus the kind of the vertical depthness, the vertical is what is the only way you really can achieve kind of the performance that companies are looking in the complexity, right, of the supply chain. That's just kind of how in our space.
And we talked a bit about kind of the product engineering side of things, but there's then also kind of how do customers perceive value? And
Right.
the one thing being an observer to a lot of these sales processes is that they're still kind of understanding and trying to build an evaluation framework for AI native applications.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is because these applications over time can just do the work once you trust them, rather than in the prior modalities of software where we like punch in a bunch of things or we extract data, we hit a button and it goes, hey, this is what the output is. And then a human needs to go figure out what it means, what to do with it. But how have you seen kind of even kind of the value function, so to speak, for customers change?
Yeah, for us, it's still business outcome related, right? I mean, clearly there's a productivity aspect to what everyone's doing. And to your point, if it's a process orientation task, of course, an agent can do that work, right? It's really about, though, how do these things come together as an example to actually give the outcome? So I'll give you a perfect example. One of the dimensions we support in retail is this concept around planograms, right? Which is kind of where what item goes on what shelf. And almost all the multinational retailers have this massive desire to have store-specific planograms, right? Where the range and assortment are tailored, pricing is tailored to that location. But it's a heavy lift in the original kind of aspects because either templates or rules, you have to still figure out how to create planograms at that scale. We now have a large language model we've been able to develop that actually can create a very precise planogram for each retailer's location, which is game changing, right? And so now all of a sudden you're saying, well, what's the outcome? How do I justify that, to your point? And it's based on the rate of sale you gain because your assortment choices were better, right? Your out of stocks have been diminished because you have a lot more line of sight. So it always still ends up being tied tangibly back to the way companies run their business, whether it's an asset utilization in a manufacturer or it's a cost per case in a 3PL, that they're serving. It always comes back to those. And so that's part of our job is how do we show the correlation of what we're actually achieving in this technology advancement alongside with, what their business outcomes are running. And again, the bigger area that I've seen is not just all the process automation, which again is, pretty self-evident in front of us. It's how does the tech now become intelligent enough to start being a lot more predictive? Because you can pre-position inventory if you have a sense of a port delay in Long Beach, right? Or what's going on. So you're not just reacting anymore as much as companies do today, kind of getting ahead of it.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that example. What does all this mean for kind of workforce, right? As you think about the future supply chain, the type of talent we need, the skills that talent can possess, because that also feels like something that's really being challenged and tested right as people were realizing, hey, supply chain's a great place and a cool place to build your career.
100%.
Because every day is different.
Yeah, it's very transformative, right? And so even like for us, when I spoke about kind of replatforming and reimagining how supply chains run today, we didn't just replicate the way things have been done in the past. So now you really have to help organizations understand what's possible in this reimagination, and then how do the humans work with the technology, right? And it does require a lot of change management at org design and say, hey, maybe I don't need 150 planners anymore because I have 11 agents and I have 30 planners, right? In that combination, in that mix to achieve what I'm after, from my productivity standpoint. Same concept in warehousing where automation came in and robotics came in. You still need humans, obviously, but it's a different mix of skill set and operators that you have to have. And I know you've had some guests on your podcast sharing some of that transition. So for us, we do work with a lot of the SI firms as well, around the reimagination of the workforce and how
Mm.
it actually interoperates with the technology. So you're exactly right. I don't need to have a screen that looks like a spreadsheet anymore, trying to find root cause analysis, that takes me 2 days to do it. The technology can serve it up, but I still need people that are strategic to understand, what do I do about it? Right?
Yeah.
What are my choices, my business choices? So it's kind of like elevating the workforce opportunity, within supply chain and how we run them. And again, it's all done at scale. That's the biggest opportunity that technology has afforded us to do
Yeah.
now. Is it happens in seconds and minutes, not in days and weeks anymore. Even, the old batch world, there's so much batch still out there, but everything's event driven real time now. It's constantly being updated. And so it's just a different paradigm that people have to get used to. But yeah, it's a big piece of the puzzle.
So I'm going to kind of transition us a bit into the world of returns.
Yes. Yes.
You all acquired Optoro, that's enhanced and expanded your capabilities around returns management. And this is kind of like, it feels like a perennial topic, right? As we kind of enter peak season, everybody's going, oh, January, kind of the returns period's going to hit.
Right.
And man, there's a lot of waste here. But how does this kind of acquisition and integration maybe kind of push towards what a lot of retailers would like to see,
Right.
where, hey, this doesn't totally have to be a cost center. We're able to maybe drive efficiency and demonstrate we're sustainable, because maybe we can resell or thoughtfully liquidate some of
Yeah.
this return product.
No, listen, we have a very defined what we call outbound thesis for our M&A strategy, right? And fundamentally, it's looking at our portfolio. What are we trying to solve with our customers, and what are we missing? And so our first venture into returns was an acquisition of a company called Dottle, based out of the UK, a couple of years ago, and it was part of understanding the returns orchestration process side of it, and then of course looking at how warehouse processing would fold into that. Optero was another dimension of that expansion into the space. And again, we sort of looked at ourselves and said, look, for the better part of 30 years, we spent all of our investment into optimizing inventory one way. We had zero in terms of anything related to returns. So those two acquisitions combined have now given us a platform to start helping companies understand the power of looking at their supply chain holistically. So I'll give you a perfect example. A fashion apparel retailer, multinational, has as much as 40% of their sales returned. So if you look at it from that dimension, then you're saying, do you realize that's your largest supplier now? And then you start to think about, how do I integrate that into my forecasting and replenishment and allocation capability so that I have it factored in, and
Yeah.
it's available for sale, because otherwise I'm over inventorying and I'm dealing with markdowns, right? And so
Yep.
what's been fascinating is returns across multiple disciplines have still been somewhat siloed. It's been a cost of business.
Fascinating.
It's been, and no one in supply chain planning going outbound had incorporated these things. So it's the omni inventory story about how do you truly bring it in as a dimension of managing your inventory holistically, and then starting to predict how much of this inventory is sitting at a consumer's home that is going to be returned, but hasn't been returned yet, right? All of these things. So it was a big play to drive that whole holistic end-to-end solution for retailers. And then specifically in logistics, warehouse automation, warehouse processing across all the major players, in terms of the logistics providers. We are the backbone now of all of the major ones, that support parcel and last mile, right? And so that was very deliberate about that strategy to start making it. And it's become a huge starting material impact to these operations now, right? In these businesses. And so again, it gave us the completeness of the portfolio, I'll say, between return orchestration and warehouse processing and available of inventory back into planning.
Amazing. I have one last question. I'm going to bring us home here. We've covered a lot of ground, right? We discussed Blue Yonder's breadth of product portfolio, how AI is being operationalized and realized, returns. But I guess as we kind of step back, we're wrapping up 2025. we're looking ahead into 2026. And I'd be curious, is there kind of a perspective or observation you have that maybe runs counter to conventional wisdom, or like you're not just kind of seeing others view it for whatever reason the same way you do? I'd love to talk about that a little bit, because that's kind of where they're interesting, thought-provoking discussions.
When you really start thinking about it, right? Well, look, the velocity and speed at which the technology is being deployed, we've never seen in our entire lifetime, right? And so I think that was the old exponential curve. So we do kind of have to get our heads wrapped around the speed at which we have to now be forced into transforming our businesses in supply chain. That's one piece of the puzzle. The second is you really start to wonder, does the time dimension of planning and execution collapse completely? Like planning would no longer be a discipline necessary, because you would have this environment where it's all about dynamic execution, right? And how supply chains move product around the world, how factories make product. Again, part of our acquisition was all the way down to order slotting and sequencing, right? It's just this massive coordination of as it flows. And if you back into that, because the time dimension is getting collapsed on both fronts, you could literally sit here and argue that it's an autonomous supply chain, right? Where it's self-healing. It actually can correct and predict disruption, and you don't have the planning dimension that sits there. It's quite provocative, but it could happen. It could happen sooner than later. I think, the other aspect of SaaS is, does it eventually, get eaten up, right, by just having agentic infrastructure, to drive it. Now, most people think that will happen. It happens in 20 years, 10 years, 5 is kind of the big question mark. So I would say the two dimensions are really what we're always thinking about, and again, just for Blue Yonder's self-preservation, right? In our world, what is our moat as a SaaS supply chain software company? We have to think about that and try to stay ahead of it. So I would say those things are a little bit more provocative in terms of, what really happens with the large language models and the agentic infrastructure on top, and is that just ultimately replace SaaS? Good.
Amazing. Thank you for indulging me in that. I have
others.
I've been ready to go. Yes, I don't want to answer that.
I know.
But with that, I'm going to bring us home. I love to finish off on a lighthearted note, and for today, I'm going to do a bit of this or that. So I'm going to give you 2 options, and I want you to pick and kind of give me why you've picked the choice you have. First up, AI or human intuition.
Ooh, I think AI will actually learn as much of intuition as we have. I think it's going to be complementary to what we do. I just think it's going to do it at a speed faster than we can.
Yeah. Robots or drones?
Ooh. I think robots there's still a physical aspect that's necessary in the world, at least in supply chain. So robots would still be, probably the primary, if you will, automation that we see in the physical movement of supply chain.
And then last but not least, work from the office or work from anywhere?
I think it's literally work from anywhere, although work from office is very productive from a collaboration perspective. Now, to be fair, technology's come a long way where you can collaborate pretty easily using remote technology, but the human interaction, as we talk about, is still critical. It's why we travel all the time, in our world. And so I think a healthy combination is what we're seeing and what we promote, especially across different functions, would probably be where we land. And most of our customers, by the way, are like 3 days a week, and so they still get that collaboration of human interaction, but it's more flexible than going back to the old days of 5 days a week.
Amazing. With that, Wayne, thank you so much for joining us, sharing your experience and your wisdom, and look forward to see what 2026 brings us all in the world of supply chain technology.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Follow us at dynamo.vc for all the latest episodes. We'll see you next time.